Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mesoteric and our continuing series, The Model Museum, where I review every single Sega Model 1, Model 2, and Model 3 game in a retrospective fashion that's not an arcade racing game, because I did that retrospective last year, so check the playlist. And if you can't tell already, we're playing Star Wars Trilogy on the Sega Model 3. Now when people think of Sega and arcade games back in the day, this game is one of those games that everyone seems to think of. It was absolutely everywhere. Star Wars was hot back then, still is today, and when Sega released this game, it was absolutely an epic hit for them. Now, truth be told, I love Sega Star Wars games, but as far as the movies are concerned, I've only ever been like a slightly casual viewer of them. Nothing wrong with them, no judgments. I've just never been a Star Wars fan. That always seems to surprise people, just never was for me. But the game, on the other hand, absolutely love it, 10 out of 10. It is such an iconic part of Sega's history. When I first saw this game in arcades, it really did feel like the movies come to life, because my father did have me watch all of them as a kid because he loved them, and he was very surprised that I never really got hooked into them. But the games, on the other hand, pretty much any Star Wars video game I would happily play, and this was one of my favorites. Seeing this in real time in the 90s was nothing short of spectacular. The graphical fidelity, the recreation of events that you saw in the movies, the sound effects and the soundtrack being replicated on arcade hardware, you had never really seen that before outside of the original Sega Model 1. Now, fair warning, normally I give you a taste of the soundtrack in pretty much all of my videos, but with Star Wars Trilogy you're not getting that, because I can guarantee you every single piece of music in this video game throws up a copyright flag. John Williams is definitely getting paid, and I get it, he deserves it, and Disney's definitely not letting you get one by them. But if you want to hear the soundtrack, just look it up after this video, or just go watch a Star Wars movie, because it's basically all from that. But even this Death Star run here, with all of the different TIE fighters coming through, having to shoot them off the tail of your allies while you navigate around the surface of the Death Star, all in 60 frames per second, it is nothing short of breathtaking. Now I am playing this on the Supermodel emulator, so I can go to 16:9 and get the upscaled internal resolution, which does make the game look better than an original arcade board, but even back in the day, seeing this was nothing short of amazing. And you'll see I took my first continue here, showing you that this game definitely does not want you to win. It's not a long game, and it definitely wanted to make sure it got your quarters out of you before it let you see the credits. And interestingly enough, I know of an arcade cabinet literally about 12 blocks from my house. It is on free play in a bar, and I played it within the last couple months before I did the voiceover for this, just so I could get a sense of playing the cabinet one more time. And honestly, like pretty much every arcade game, I was probably better at it then than I am now, because you put a couple drinks in me and suddenly I become more talented at arcade games as well as pool. But all jokes aside, just doing this trench run here and trying to get the missiles into the little exhaust vent on the Death Star, it is just the movie scene come to life. I know 100 jokes have been made about it, still not sure why there wasn't a cover over the hatch, and I feel like the most recent Top Gun movie kind of was a nod to this, where they had to use the first set of missiles to basically break the hatch off before they blew up the underground nuclear plant. Kind of felt Star Wars related to me, but tell me what you think down below, because no one else I tell that to seems to think they're related whatsoever. But as the Millennium Falcon comes into view there, this basically takes place over the events of all three films, taking all the best scenes and just running with them. But I will say not every single scene is 100% a winner compared to how they opened the game here, destroying the original Death Star, but watching it blow up, so iconic. But now as we move into this AT-AT chase scene here, it's definitely an iconic moment from the movie, but honestly compared to the grand epic scale of blowing up the Death Star, this is such a smaller experience, and honestly it's a level that feels like maybe it holds on for a minute longer than it should. These are arcade games, they do want your quarters, but it feels like maybe Sega padded the runtime of this game out, making levels last slightly longer than you would expect. Not to say you're not having fun, but they open with such an epic battle against the Death Star, it really is hard to follow that up in level 2 if you are going through the trilogy. But seeing the stormtroopers drop out of the AT-ATs on those ropes, absolutely amazing, and I forgot the names of these smaller guys here. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what they are, because for the life of me I cannot remember. But it's still an awesome level. It's just a much smaller, slower pace level, and trust me, when you get to the final level in this game, it is an epic space battle, the likes of which I don't think an arcade game has ever done as well. But this really is a light gun game. Sure, you are in different ships from the Star Wars universe, and you're having these space battles, but at the heart of it, it really is just an XY coordinate game. So of course they're going to bring us in to this base, and we're going to be shooting stormtroopers. And I will say I'm not sure if this is just because the game is slightly easy here, or if it's an in-joke about how stormtroopers have terrible aim, but getting hit in this level is basically impossible. Even with the laser machine gun in back there, still shoot to the left of me and don't hit me whatsoever. It's one of those things, stormtroopers are always notorious for not having good aim, which is nothing to complain about in an arcade game that requires your quarters to continue to play it. If they decide to go easy mode for a moment, that just means you have a little bit more money in your wallet for a drink after you finish playing it. Or back in the day, maybe for some snacks after school. But again, just seeing all of this with the Millennium Falcon in the background, there's such iconic scenes, and I know that this game is going to be even more beloved by Star Wars fans that are also Sega Arcade fans, because I take this game surely from the perspective of loving and collecting arcade games and loving Sega since basically the Sega Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog days. But if you have that love for Star Wars, it gets even better. Now, as you go through this speeder bike sequence here through the woods, it does give you control of where you are on the screen as well. This is not 100% on rails all the time. You can move left and right, and there are going to be trees you can 100% run into if you are not paying attention. Honestly, the navigation isn't that hard, but navigating left and right while also dealing with your aiming reticle and shooting these stormtroopers off their bikes does become a big challenge, but it's a fair challenge when you're doing it right. The sense of accomplishment of being able to get through this level is epic. It really makes you feel like you were playing the movie, and when you succeed, you know it's 100% based upon your inputs into the controls and your skill at the game. But as soon as we get through this bike area, we go to another light gun section, and I would say the light gun areas are the weakest part of this game, because compared to anything like the House of the Dead, Virtua Cop, LE Machine Guns, Gunblade New York, these definitely lack the action punch that I'm looking for. It takes the stormtroopers so long to actually aim their laser rifles at you that it basically becomes almost an instantaneous win. And the boss of this area, I don't know exactly what they were trying to do with it, but it also just kind of feels like a spam the shoot button to win, because you'll see that life bar go down over and over again, and it hasn't even turned towards me to actually shoot. You are going to see some warning boxes here, and I might take a little bit of damage, but it is one of those things that if you basically just unload your gun onto your enemy, you're going to be basically perfectly fine. You can just go toe-to-toe in a shootout with them, and you're going to win 100% of the time. So that's one of those things. The balance of difficulty in this game seems to be very uneven, but at least it's uneven in rewarding the player for not dying when you feel like you were doing everything right. But like I said, once we get to the last area in the game, the sense of scale and grandeur just becomes epic. You have another under construction Death Star in the background. There's this giant planet underneath you, which probably has a name in the canon. Tell me down below if you know. And you have all of these different ships, both ally and enemy, flying around in space. The scale and epicness of this is second to none, and Sega's developers and artists 100% knocked a grand slam out of the park when they made this level. And this may be one of the single best levels in any arcade game ever made, but you tell me what you would nominate for that, because I would be curious. And just coming in on this battleship, shooting all of those turrets there, strafing the ship as you go by, it 100% works, and I have never gotten bored with this level. I do wish that some of the middle of the game was a little bit tighter and a little bit more action-packed, but when you get to the end of the game, I have zero complaints here. The Millennium Falcon flying by accidentally shot him and threatened to have me brought up on charges. There are no real voices from the movies, and you're just playing a generic character that doesn't really seem to have a name whatsoever, but honestly, it lets the player pretend they're in the universe of Star Wars, and let's not pretend that that's not why everyone wants to play a game like this. It's just a perfect level on a near-perfect game that everyone knows, loves, and remembers, and that is why Star Wars Trilogy is such an awesome time. Now, I did cut out the lightsaber duels just because I've never liked them, and I don't try to talk about things that I don't appreciate in games. If you love them, leave me a comment down below. And I will say this last area, again, having to shoot all these towers kind of just feels like it's padded out for runtime. I cut like 90% of it out there, but it's like 2 minutes of doing the exact same thing. But again, once you get into the Death Star, the intensity comes back and you're 100% loving it again. And that's the thing about Star Wars Trilogy. Even the levels that aren't great are still very good. The B+ levels in the middle are a fun time, and the absolute A+ levels that buffer the start and finish of this game are some of the most fun you can have in a Sega arcade game ever made. It's just one of those things. I wish Star Wars would come back from Sega to do a new trilogy for the new movies in arcades. I would love to see that. There's been some Star Wars arcade games since this game, but I don't think anyone's ever done it as well as Star Wars Trilogy on the Model 3. But tell me down below what your favorite Star Wars video game is of all time, because I would be curious to hear the nominations. But short of that, we went straight on this video. Sorry for no soundtrack example, but like I said, I can't hit those copyright flags. They get mad at me for it. I'll be back next week with more Model Museum, and I'll have videos throughout the week as well, but that second Death Star is destroyed. We have done our job here. We'll see you guys next time. We've escaped. Bye-bye.